And we back. All right. So first off, my voice sounds a little funny. I am actually kind of dealing with a weird sore throat and stuff right now. So my throat is definitely not at 100 right now. So apologies for that. So I'm just going to do my best to kind of get through this. And this video is going to be a little bit different than my normal Apex Legends videos. Obviously, normally I just kind of do funny, cool moments or kind of full round videos of Apex. This one is just going to be me talking about each legend and ranking them for Season 3 only. So unfortunately, I'm just going to be doing a lot of talking with a sore throat. Full disclosure, I am not an awesome Apex Legends player. I'm just not. I'm average at best. If you've watched my videos before, you know I'm not going to go off for 20 kills and 4,000 damage. I've definitely won some games and carried people to those victories. I think currently I have like 42 wins or something like that total. So I'm obviously in no way a pro. I also only play like twice a week for a couple hours. I am definitely getting better into Season 3. I think my kill-death ratio is like 1.16 or something like that right now. So I'm finally getting more kills than I am dying, so that's always a plus. My wins, I'm getting maybe 4 or 5 kills, 1,200 maybe 1,600 damage, things like that. So I'm making steps. I'm becoming a better teammate than previous seasons, things like that. So I'm stepping up my game. I also don't play ranked. I've definitely talked about it and have thought about it. It just hasn't been my style in the past. I used to play Rainbow Six a lot, never played ranked. I think I played like 2 or 3 ranked games, so I never even got past the minimum to get myself considered ranked. I do watch a lot of ranked videos though. From people like Kobe, Staycation. But unfortunately, these rankings are just going to be a lot more based around Season 3 in general. And also, it's going to depend on somebody's play style. Your style isn't going to match mine, right? And your style isn't going to match somebody else's, and so on and so forth. So just as far as comments saying my opinions are wrong, because that makes sense, just calm down. It fits my play style, and it's really, like I said, it's really just opinion based. My number 11 could be somebody's number 1 because they're the best player with that legend in the world, right? So it doesn't make sense to comment and put somebody down about an opinion. All right, so let's just get into this. Starting off, number 11, Mirage, which I really hate saying this because Mirage was like, Season 1 was really my favorite legend, and amazing personality. I know I actually had more kills with him than anyone else, but people don't get bamboozled as much as they used to, at least like old school players don't. I still on occasion will shoot a decoy, but I think like giving away my location for a couple seconds is not as useful as what it's really made out to be. Gunshots and actually being able to see those gunshots to me are a lot more useful than the team getting to notified like, oh, somebody shot somebody's decoy from 45 meters away. By the time that happens, they're gone. His ultimate ability, the Vanishing Act, can be useful in a gunfight to really quickly get better positioning and get behind a player, but it really has to be used in a noisy gunfight or with other distractions around, because you can, the good elite players will still be able to hear the footsteps of an invisible Mirage. So he did get a buff with it back in Season 2, where he became less visible during that, but you can still hear him. So therefore, not quite as useful. I do feel like Mirage definitely deserves a buff. I think most players will put Mirage, if they were to rank for Season 3, would put Mirage in the bottom tiers. His ultimate and passive ability, Encore, especially. I think if Encore, he was invisible for a couple extra seconds when downed, that would be helpful. Or maybe even deploy more decoys, so it almost looks like Vanishing Act when he is down. I'm not sure. Something that I don't know has been talked about for Mirage's passive Encore is something similar with Vanishing Act when he is down, to deploy more decoys, and then maybe not even let the opponent know that he was knocked, so they don't know he was knocked, or did he actually use the Vanishing Axe, so the opponent doesn't get the notification that the player was knocked. Maybe that's too much, I'm not sure, but if somebody's like, wait, did I knock him or did I just get bamboozled, that's a lot more useful than his current Encore, which to me is the worst passive ability. Either way, Mirage's abilities are just not super useful. They're a lot more selfish, so he can be a decent solo. Just doesn't bring much utility to a 3-man squad. Therefore, he is number 11 for me. Number 10, Octane. So similar to Mirage, a lot of selfish abilities from Octane, which make him less useful to me. And maybe it's just me, but doesn't it always feel like loot goblins are more attracted to Octane because they know they can get to death boxes and loot bins and into buildings faster than their teammates? I mean, nothing bugs me more than like opening a loot bin and I can hear like my Octane teammate like charging behind me to try to loot faster, or I down somebody and kill somebody and my Octane teammate sprints to that death box faster than me, even though I was the one that got that kill. I mean, that's kind of my pet peeve with Octane players is they're just constant loot goblins. And then they stand around and loot like crazy. So especially when I know they're already looted up, they have all the best gear, and they're still grabbing equipment ahead of you. It just becomes off as very selfish. And a bit of a non-real team player, you know. So overall, I'm really just kidding. Octane does have his place, and again has great mobility around the map with his stim. But because his tactical really only works for himself, it's not useful for the team, and really just helps him get out of a fight and run away from his teammates. So Octane is very selfish, and again, I don't think helps the team in a 3-man team event. The selfish players get knocked for me. The passive of the Swift Mend from Octane is possibly the most useful selfish one. Restoring health over time obviously is extremely vital, but again, that passive only helps Octane, nobody else on his team. And then finally, his ultimate launchpad can get you and your team out of sticky situations. It's just not as effective as like a Pathfinder or a Wraith ultimate. And similar to Mirage, because Octane's abilities have more selfish and non-team based things around him, he's towards the bottom of the list at number 10 for me. Gets one more notch above Mirage because that ultimate launchpad can get you some vertical plays on teams and help your team out. And also similar to Mirage, he is super fun to play with. I still love playing with Mirage, so these two can be super fun to play with. They have great personalities, and they can be very super aggressive if that's your style. Number 9, Bloodhound. So sadly, I just recently started playing with Bloodhound a little bit more, and he, she, I'm just gonna say they, I don't know. Definitely kind of fun to play with. However, prior to Season 3, I think Bloodhound was actually much higher up on this list for me, because with the addition of Crypto and the reconnaissance ability being, I think, much better for the team as a whole, Bloodhound drops down the list for me. The elite of elite Bloodhounds can use that passive ability Tracker to hunt down teams from like miles away, I feel like. I'm just not that skilled with it, and nor I think will like teams, and I play with mostly randoms. I think they're not going to help or follow you if you're trying to hunt down somebody. And sometimes I'll see a Bloodhound on my team going crazy and trying to hunt down somebody, and you're just not that likely to follow them. So I ignore most of the tracking signals from his passive, unless it's super recent. The tactical ability of Bloodhound is the Eye of the Allfather, which is basically a scan that unfortunately can be seen by everybody. Now, being able to see enemies through walls and traps through walls is useful. It's just not a full 360 scan, so you kind of have to aim it. And with the verticality of Season 3 in buildings, and sometimes when those final rings end up in buildings with 2-3 levels, having a Bloodhound, and if it doesn't scan vertically, then Bloodhound's a little less useful. And again, everybody knows when they're scanned, so that makes it a little less useful as well. However, the best part about Bloodhound is definitely the ultimate ability, Beast of the Hunt. And there are few things more terrifying than hearing an opposing Bloodhound go into Beast of the Hunt and turning on their ultimate. Yikes. So that's kind of like a panic mode, right? But playing a Bloodhound in Beast of the Hunt is extremely fun. Being able to see your enemies shine in a bright red while everything else is black and white, and watching their trails as they're running away from you behind them gives you such an amazing tracking and hunting ability, which virtually turns you into the Predator himself. And then finally, an increase in speed just makes it super challenging for your opponents as well. And seeing those bright red eyes of Bloodhound. But finally, addition of Crypto and that surveillance drone, Bloodhound is definitely a little less useful in Season 3 than he was previously. Number 8, Bangalore. Okay, so a little bit of controversy here because Bangalore easily could be moved up to 7, 6, 5, 4, whatever, for anybody. And I know there's some Bangalore mains out there who are going to be upset with this one. However, and sometimes it's what have you done for me lately, I feel that Bangalore can cause more problems than what she can help with. If you do not know how to use her tactical smokes, don't use them at all. I have died a ton, and especially here recently when maybe there's been an influx of new players with Season 3 and the new Shadowfall event. There's a lot of new players around, and when people they see videos and like, who are you supposed to start with? Bangalore is one of those like 1, 2, 3 people to start with because she's fairly easy to use and not super complicated. Therefore, a lot of people would play with her at the beginning, and they see a fight, they start smoking. And when you get hit and you're in the middle of a fight and your teammate Bangalore shoots a smoke grenade in the room that you're in and you're in the middle of that gunfight, that's when bad things happen. You lose track of your opponent, and then when the smoke clears, you don't even know which direction you're facing. You could be facing the ground, you could be facing the ceiling, and then you get lasered in the back of the head. If the smokes are used for reviving or escapes, they can be super useful. But new Bangalores can cause a lot more problems than what she's worth. So therefore, Bangalore is pretty low on my list. Her passive double time is very handy for escapability and getting out of the way from any of those nasty charge rifles in Season 3. Kind of makes you feel like Octane, which again makes Bangalore a very good starting character and starting legend to use. Finally, her ultimate Rolling Thunder did get a big buff to for damage, which helps. Isn't quite as spread out as Gibraltar, so therefore a little less useful for the team, so therefore ranked lower than Gibraltar for me. Bangalore, as I mentioned, could easily be a top 5 legend for me if people would smoke at the right time. But unfortunately, smoking your teammates while they're in the middle of fights is a horrible, horrible strategy. Number 7, Gibraltar. So I'm super excited that Gibraltar got a buff for Season 3 because he was by far the least played character up to this point for me, and all of a sudden, like, I was playing with him for like 2 or 3 straight days. So if you didn't know, Gibraltar and his teammates can now heal in his dome 25% faster with shields or healing. That's basically the same buff as Lifeline's ability of healing. So spoiler alert, I moved Lifeline down a spot or 2 for me in Season 3 because Gibraltar can give that ability to the full team. So I finally did start using Gibraltar a bit in Season 3. I think maybe in like up through Season 2 I had probably 10 to 15, maybe 20 games played as Gibraltar, and that was really just for daily objectives. I just didn't enjoy him, and then one of my regular teammates played with him a lot, so I went to other people. I am a little bit faster of a mover, and he's slow. Has little to no mobility. He has a massive hitbox like Caustic, so he doesn't get much play for me, and nor in ranked or pro leagues for the most part. But the buffs in Season 3 are very helpful. Not only can you heal 25% faster in his tactical dome, but you can throw that sucker insanely far. I think it got a 50 to 60% buff on how far it can be thrown, so play with that. It's fun. It also adds a bit to his mobility and team protection. So adding kind of an extra spot to kind of get behind and be protected. So I'll give him that. His passive gun shield is a lot more useful than I gave it credit for in the past. I kind of always thought, as well as the dome, it was basically like a beacon to other teams. Here I am, over here. But walking into a dome with Gibraltar in there, and he's got his gun shield out, aiming down sights at you, you're not going to win that gunfight the majority of the time. You got to get through that shield first, and then into a fortified Gibraltar. So if you also didn't know, Gibraltar has a fortified bonus. It's 15% extra damage he's going to take. And then finally his ultimate, I think also got a damage buff in Season 3, like Bangalore did. And it's more spread out, so that's helpful for Gibraltar. His defensive, it's called defensive bombardment, is to me crazy offensive. It's spread out further than Bangalore's, which is another reason Gibraltar is higher up on my list with that fortified bonus and the healing bonus that he has in his dome. So for now, he's a number 7 for me. I think if I get more hours in with Gibraltar, I might be able to bump him up a spot or two. Number 6, Caustic. Okay, so I used to hate playing with Caustic when he first came out. I thought, dude is totally useless. He's a lame character. He's basically a dumb villain. His ultimate ability sucked. You could easily shoot the gas traps as an opponent. And then one day I'm playing probably to try to get some daily objectives off the list. I landed in Bunker in Kings Canyon. So you know what I'm talking about with this. When I finally learned how to use traps and trick players with the gas, Caustic became actually very fun to play. And for a couple weeks, I actually played with Caustic a lot. And like a lot of the other legends, constantly learning how to use those gas traps and using them more and more and more often is more useful to you and your team. So running around with him and never using them, like as if you're especially just looting and no other teams are around, put down those gas traps, man. Always use them. You know, you'll always get damage when they go off. You're limiting the vision of your teammates. It's so helpful. And speaking of limiting vision, Caustic's passive ability of being able to see through that grass is so useful when you're cornered and you're getting third partied, whatever. Being able to see through all that gas and you're just dropping gas traps down like crazy, you're throwing your ultimate, being able to see through that is very useful. So that passive is helpful. However, the problem with Caustic is you limit your team with those as well as the ultimate gas. Your teammates cannot see through it. They also get slowed. The gas grenade definitely needs a buff of how much it spreads, I feel. And since it slows down your teammates and they can't see through it, the ultimate of Caustic is very useless to me anyway. The traps, however, can be strategically placed and very similar to Watson, can be very, very useful if Caustic can survive to the end game. And honestly, nothing is scarier other than maybe Bloodhound trying to push a Caustic when he's bunkered up in a building. It's very hard to survive that and always dumb to push a Caustic inside. Just the other day, I died to the storm, and a combination of the storm and Caustic's gas traps, because the Caustic blocked the only path myself and my team could take to get to one of the final rings as it was closing in. So I'm sitting here taking gas traps, I'm getting hit by the gas, and then the storm's coming in. And in those later rounds, 3, 4, 5, you do not want to get caught up in that. So Caustic definitely falls in the middle for me because he can be very useful and strategic, definitely more towards the later game. And as people have learned how to use him better, he's become more useful. Because, however, he has limited mobility and a big hitbox, does have the fortified damage and the fortified buff, but it becomes a bit of a trade-off with how slow he really is. And the ultimate grenades, if they don't get a buff soon, then really he's less useful without an ultimate that's ultimate. Number 5, Lifeline. So Lifeline is one of the most quoted, impersonated legends for sure, an amazing personality like a Mirage or an Octane, and was much more useful, I think, in the past. But with the added buff to the gold armor, with getting fast heals, Lifeline, I think combined with that becomes a very tough opponent. But if your teammates have the gold armor and your opponents have the gold armor, Lifeline's a little less useful. And I've seen a lot of Lifeline mains, like Kobe, for example, go away with her or kind of go a different direction because she has no escapability like a Wraith would or an Octane, Bangalore, Pathfinder. Her most useful ability currently, I think, is her passive, which is her medic ability. Being able to revive down teammates faster and being down behind a dome shield is very useful to your team in the middle of gunfights. However, it does become a beacon. I know when I see a Lifeline, an opponent Lifeline reviving behind that shield, I get in there as fast as I possibly can, or I'm chucking thermites in there as much as I can. So it's best to be able to use her abilities strategically and at a distance if possible. The tactical healing drone is also very useful. I do, however, I always try to carry enough heals with me regardless of having a Lifeline or not. I want to be able to heal myself. Sadly, a lot of Lifeline randoms I do play with never drop down that dome, or at least most, I feel, don't drop it at the best time, and they kind of use it selfishly, like only when they're hurt, they drop it. Some will, I think, but I think a lot of players forget that they're Lifeline and they're there to heal their team, not only just themselves. So if you're going to play with Lifeline and never drop your drone, then really what's the point? You should be playing as somebody else. The ultimate ability care package drops in 3 items for your team, one being armor, so it's great if somebody still has a white or a blue armor to probably get a purple out of that. 1 healing item, a med kit or a battery or a shield cell, and then finally a gun accessory, some type of weapon attachment like a scope. Unfortunately, they don't contain any type of legendary weapons, and by the time you really drop your second one, your team is pretty much looted up at that point, so really it's just the first one that can be useful. Most games I'm not going to ever drop a second one if I'm playing with Lifeline. The only time I'll drop a second one is really just a distraction, because at that point it's getting towards an end game. I do it to either distract a team or use it as a trap almost. She's still, is very high up on the list at number 5 because she has a lot of healing potential and a great passive ability, as well as her very small hitbox and a low profile. And if she does have that level 4 shield, she can be a very tough opponent. But because of the buffs of other players and the usefulness of other players and the escapability of other players, she's not in the top 4. Number 4, Crypto. Okay, so Crypto is new and can definitely be a bit of a slow play for sure, but the recon ability of Crypto makes him crazy useful. However, it again has to be a well-communicating team, or at least be able to ping right and not crazy pings, nonstop. His drone can be very distracting in fights, and basically gives you the ability of wall hacks. The opposing team either has to look away and shoot the drone and get it out of the way, or basically give away their position non-stop getting scanned and hope they can win a gunfight against somebody who always knows where they are, which is not easy. The ultimate EMP is very useful, I found, and but when I see the drone and I'm going up against an opposing crypto and they come in to EMP me, when I see that drone, I hear it and I see the blue lines when that EMP is getting ready to go, you can quickly drop your armor on the ground and then pick it right back up with no damage done to it. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you don't get it off in time, and you do still get kind of the shock from the EMP. But you don't have to use your shield cells and batteries, so that is extremely helpful. You can also EMP your own team and kind of shock them, so that's definitely something to be wary of, watching where you're EMPing. It's best to do it right before you're going to push. So again, being able to communicate and having a mic pinging isn't always useful, knowing like when to push. And then, as mentioned, his passive ability of that Neuralink, spotting opposing teams who are within 30 meters, is great. So that passive ability of virtual wall hacks is extremely useful to your team. However, the drone is a literal one-shot, so it can easily be destroyed by any player with decent aim. Crypto is not super high on my list, the top 3, because having to pause constantly to move your drone into an effective spot is slow. The drone can be easily destroyed, and always having to pause and get onto your drone can be very cumbersome at times. Leaves you very vulnerable, especially if your team is always moving way ahead of you and you're trying to keep up with your drone, getting on your drone, getting off your drone. So you have to be good at communicating, and therefore the communication is key, and it works both ways. You have to be able to communicate with your team, and your team has to be able to communicate with you when they're moving. I will be very curious to see how pros use crypto, if they do, in any type of league play for sure. However, I have started noticing some regular Apex players kind of going away from crypto and back to their old mains just because it doesn't fit their play style of having to stop and get on the drone. However, he still stays at a very high number 4 for me because of the reconnaissance ability. Number 3, Wraith. Okay, so I'm probably going to get some people who are going to hate this one. However, I will say right off of the bat that Wraith can easily be number 1, number 2, or number 3 for me. The top 3 can be moved around however you want. I'll say why I have her at number 3 and not a number 2 or number 1 though. She is a favorite of a lot of people, and again, move her around wherever you want. I just find the next 2 people a little more useful. Wraith does have probably the best escapability in her tactical into the void and a small hitbox. So getting shot at and knowing I gotta move, being able to hit your tactical ability and getting out of there super quick is very useful and helpful to yourself. She can also move her team around the map quickly and effectively with her ultimate ability, the Rift. Her passive ability, the Voices, can warn herself and her teams of any traps in the area, as well as when somebody is aiming down sights at her. So again, a useful passive ability. However, I think it's very important to have a team that again has to be able to communicate with a good Wraith player. If the player isn't using their mic and letting people know what's going on, then she's a little less useful. A lot of Wraith mains I play with, or anybody who's just playing Wraith, they don't have to be a Wraith main, they tend to draw more attention to us by using her ultimate ability at the wrong time and place. You can easily see that rift from far away. And especially if I see a rift like randomly pop up, or like see the small, and then when she sets it, I take it quickly and then I go and light her up because she's usually not ready for it. So I use rifts against Wraiths a lot. The ultimate can be very effective in the late game for sure, being able to bounce from one building to another, or from the top of a building to the ground, and just general flanking of opposing teams. However, it can be placed wrong, incorrectly, more often than is placed correct. So communicate. This is just my experience with her. Again, I don't play with her a ton. I recently just started playing with her a little bit more, so I'm definitely learning more with her, and she's become more fun than what I used to have with her for sure in Season 3. So she's still, and being able to move a full team like that, she is still extremely useful. It should probably be, if you're playing as a team, somebody should probably be Wraith on your team at any given time. But really, it's all about timing. The person has to know what they're doing with that rift, and being able to use that ultimate at the right time, in the right place, and placing it at the right time. So yeah, I think that's really it for Wraith. Being able to get your team in that proper position is so useful with those rifts, but has to be placed right. Number 2, Watson. Okay, so I love Watson. Okay, full disclosure, I love her. I love the ability. She definitely fits my playstyle a little bit. I'm not super fast. I don't push teams a lot. I would rather push a little bit and then bunker up, so to speak. I would rather play with somebody who loves to push and play with Watson to play behind them a little bit and be able to give us protection. I feel I'm very much more useful in the late game than I am at the beginning of a game, although I have stepped my game up at the beginning of the game, and being able to take on a game at the take on a team at the beginning of a match a little more than I used to. But I do play with Watson more than anybody else right now. And while in open spaces, she is less effective with her nodes and her walls and her fences, she can still slow down pushes by putting up the electrical tactical walls anywhere. And I literally mean anywhere. So this is a small piece of advice if you're playing with Watson, is people don't use her tactical ability enough. They only put it inside buildings, block off doors, things like that. You can easily put it on the side of or through tunnels. You can put it from like a rock. If you guys are kind of bunkered behind, healing, you're in a fight, put down a wall real quick so they have to go around it or they have to stay away. They can't come up and push you super quick. So use that tactical ability. People don't use it enough. And even out in the middle of nowhere and you're not even there anymore, you've left, people have a tendency to want to shoot down those walls. They will shoot the nodes at the bottom and give away their position. They'll either end up touching it as they're going to a building, or they will shoot them. And you can see those walls on your mini map if they get destroyed. So always place walls. Always place those tactical offenses. People don't do it enough. And be sure to hoard at least 1 or 2 ultimate accelerants for the end game. Even Crypto's EMP cannot take out the ultimate of Watson. It will take out her fences. But with the ultimate pylon or 2 down, if you're in that end game and it's a 1 team versus 1 team situation, you're down to those final 2 teams, you've got a pylon or 2 up in your bunkered up area, she can get those fences back up in no time if you get EMP'd. With her passive ability of Spark of Genius, she can charge that back up real quick if you've got those nodes down. So keeping an ultimate accelerant with you and dropping down those pylons quickly and then getting up the walls super fast. Watson is super effective for the end game. If I'm one of the final 3 or 4 teams and I'm Watson, or I have a decent Watson on my team, I'm feeling very confident and immediately look to center myself for that final ring inside a building the best I can. If you can get set up, you become super effective. Learning to place down her fences constantly, even in the beginning and the middle of matches, as I said earlier, can distract and slow teams down. So do it. Those walls are very bright. The electricity is very bright. It's very distracting and it's hard to see through. So placing those down not only will slow teams down and notify you when people break them, but they're very distracting and hard to see. And finally, because she can be played right by the right people, she becomes very, very, very useful for the end game, and really crazy useful, but has to be played right. So she can't quite hit the number 1 spot for me, and she doesn't quite have the mobility of a Wraith or a Pathfinder. So that keeps her in that number 2 spot. So finally, number 1, Pathfinder. So I've really started enjoying Pathfinder this season. With a bigger map in World's Edge and more verticality with skyscrapers and buildings, Pathfinder is vital on a team. The mobility and speed from his grapple and zip lines are incredibly useful and effective. There is nothing scarier than playing against an elite Pathfinder who grapples his way up to where you can't see. Again, the Bloodhounds are pretty darn scary, and a Caustic held up in a building is pretty scary, but having a Pathfinder in a 1v1 who's going to be flipping around and getting vertical on you is pretty intimidating. In Kings Canyon, I was not a super fan of Pathfinder. There's so many twists and turns, and the main looting areas are inside small buildings where he becomes less effective. But with open areas in Season 3, Pathfinder I'm finding is super legit. The vertical ability of Pathfinder, just super OP, and being able to move the team farther than Wraith with his zipline feels more effective to me, especially considering that Wraith has to actually get to the end point of her tunnel. Pathfinder does not. He can just shoot out that zipline wherever he wants. I also feel the passive ability of the beacons was pretty pointless in Kings Canyon, since you can get from one side to the other of Kings Canyon fairly quickly, even as a slower character without mobility. On a bigger map, the beacons have become much more useful, and especially if you can get where you need to be first, beating the ring and opponents and having vertical plays set up and or a defense with a Caustic or a Watson becomes very hard in later rounds. All this mobility for a big map and a weird hitbox that Pathfinder has gives Pathfinder my number 1 spot. Okay, so that is it for my Season 3 rankings. Again, this is all opinion-based, so, any anger, frustration about where your favorite legend is lined up, don't worry about it. Calm down, just chill. It's just my personal experience and my play style. However, I do appreciate any useful comments, and if you've enjoyed this, just consider liking and subscribing. That's all. Later.